The ER at Mercy General smelled like antiseptic and winter, that particular cold that comes from industrial-grade disinfectant mixed with the metallic trace of blood nobody quite gets out of the floors no matter how hard they scrub. Katie Rodriguez moved through the chaos of the morning shift like water finding its level, her movements economical and precise, her worn sneakers silent against the tile. First week. Keep the head down. Blend in. That was the assignment she'd given herself when she took the job at Mercy General in Raleigh 3 days ago, and so far the assignment was holding. She checked and fall line on a post-op patient in Bay 2 without being asked, adjusted the drip rate with the ease of someone who'd done this exact procedure 4,000 times, and noted the patient's color was improving, less gray, more pink in the lips. Good. The fluorescent lights hummed their fluorescent hum above her head, casting everything in that particular shade of institutional white that made even healthy people look slightly sick. She didn't look up when a resident rushed past her carrying 3 charts and looking like he might cry. First week. Stay invisible. The scar on her forearm caught the light as she moved, a thin white line that ran from wrist to elbow, barely visible unless you knew what you were looking at, and it was covered anyway by the long sleeves of her scrub jacket. She'd learned to wear long sleeves, even in summer. Less questions that way. Less stories people wanted her to tell. The jacket itself was worn at the cuffs, the fabric thin from maybe 800 washings, but the lining was intact. Inside that lining, sewn carefully into a hidden pocket with thread that matched the weave, was a patch the size of a postage stamp. Kandahar Provincial Hospital. The stitching was small and neat, military stitching, the kind that didn't come loose. She touched it briefly as she reached for supplies, her fingers finding the familiar outline through the fabric. Just a reminder. Just something to hold onto when the fluorescent light started feeling like a cage. Captain Michael Torres was in room 347. She knew this because she'd read the assignment board, and because she'd spent the last 72 hours carefully not thinking about the fact that her son Michael's commanding officer from Kandahar Provincial Hospital was now a patient in her hospital, recovering from injuries sustained in the same region where she used to work, before everything got classified and buried and erased. Before the Navy had decided that Senior Chief Petty Officer Catherine Rodriguez didn't exist anymore. Before the CIA had redacted her name from every official record and Operation Silent Shepherd had become the kind of thing people weren't allowed to acknowledge even when they lived it. She'd seen Captain Torres during morning rounds. He was a lean man, mid-40s, with the kind of military bearing that doesn't ever really leave your shoulders even when you're lying in a hospital bed with a morphine drip and 2 broken ribs. His eyes had met hers when she was checking his vitals, just for a second, just long enough for something to pass between them, something that felt like recognition but couldn't be recognition because that wasn't supposed to be possible anymore. His chart listed her son as next of kin. Michael Torres Rodriguez. 17 years old. The same kid she'd walked out on 7 years ago when the Navy told her to disappear, told her that keeping her family alive meant erasing herself from their lives. The same kid who probably didn't remember what she looked like. The same kid whose commanding officer was now looking at her like he'd seen a ghost, and she was the ghost, and he was the only person in this building who would understand why. She finished adjusting his for without speaking. He didn't speak either. Just watched her work, his breathing steady, his jaw clenched in a way that suggested he was processing something. She held her voice level and clinical when she asked, "How's the pain level, Captain?" "Manageable," he said. 7 years of not hearing his name and she heard it anyway, inside her head, bouncing around like something trapped. "Michael." "Captain Torres." "Sir." She nodded and made a note on his chart. First week. Keep the head down. Dr. Harrison Hargrove swept into the ICU at 10:27 a.m. like a man who'd never questioned whether he deserved the space he was taking up. He was tall enough to make it a presence, the kind of tall that made people step sideways to let him pass, and he wore his lab coat like armor, pristine white, creases sharp enough to cut, pressed by someone who wasn't him because why would someone like Hargrove press his own clothes? He trailed a flock of residents behind him, all of them moving 2 steps too fast and looking terrified, which was exactly how he liked it. Katie watched him from her station without looking like she was watching, a skill she'd learned from 17 years of not wanting to be noticed by people in positions to hurt her. Hargrove stopped 3 beds away from her and started berating a young resident named Chen for a charting error. The error was minimal, a timestamp off by 4 minutes, but Hargrove's voice had that particular edge to it that made everyone in a 15-foot radius suddenly very focused on their paperwork. "This is basic competence, Dr. Chen," Hargrove was saying, his voice moving like honey over broken glass. "A timestamp is not a suggestion. A timestamp is not approximate. For minutes is the difference between a legal defense and a malpractice settlement. For minutes is the difference between a career and a scandal." Chen's face was the color of old medical tape. Katie could see him calculating whether to defend himself and deciding against it. "Smart kid. Don't feed the predator. Don't give him a reason to stay." That's when Hargrove looked up and saw her. His eyes moved across her face like hands, and something shifted in the way he was standing. She felt it the way animals feel changes in air pressure before a storm. He turned away from Chen mid-sentence and moved toward her station. "You're new," he said. It wasn't a question. It sounded like an accusation. Katie looked up from the 4 supplies she was organizing, 18-gauge catheters in the first drawer, 20-gauge in the second, 22-gauge in the third, each one placed with the kind of precision that came from 1,000 situations where disorganization meant deaths. 3 days, she said. Her voice was soft. Deferential. The voice of someone who knew her place. Katie Rodriguez. Hargrove studied her the way a man studies a scratch on an expensive watch, quick assessment, negligible threat, back to more important things. Except he didn't look away. He looked at her the way a predator looks at potential prey, which was strange, because she was nobody. She was small and quiet and tired, the kind of nurse that people's eyes slid past without catching. She'd been invisible her whole life. It was a skill. "Well, Katie," Hargrove said, his voice taking on a pedagogical tone that made her skin feel thin, "I trust you'll be up to the standard we maintain here at Mercy General. We don't have much patience for substandard work." She nodded. She didn't argue. She didn't point out that the standard he was describing appeared to involve berating residents until they made mistakes from anxiety-induced tunnel vision. First week. Keep the head down. Morning rounds happened at 11:53 a.m. sharp, and Katie was present for the ICU section, standing back by the charts, watching. Hargrove moved through the rooms like a surgeon, except instead of a scalpel he was using his voice, cutting remarks about care plans and treatment protocols and the general inadequacy of everyone around him. Room 345, the fluid intake on this patient is excessive. Room 346, this antibiotic selection is pedestrian at best. Room 347, Captain Torres. Hargrove reviewed the chart, 2 broken ribs, partial pneumothorax from the initial trauma, now stable on observation, pain management with morphine on a scheduled protocol. He looked at the patient and said, "We'll increase the morphine. 8 milligrams every 4 hours. Katie felt the mistake the way she felt everything else, as information, as data, as a problem that needed solving before it became a tragedy. She moved forward without thinking, which was a mistake because thinking was what got you through the first week with your head down and nobody noticing you. "Captain Torres had an adverse reaction documented," she said. Her voice was still soft. Still deferential. But the content was pushing back, and Hargrove's face went through a series of micro-movements, surprise, then irritation, then something darker. "I'm sorry," he said. The tone suggested he was very sorry, in a way that involved significant consequences for whoever had just contradicted him. The chart, Katie continued, keeping her eyes on the document. Morphine at standard dosages caused gastrointestinal distress in this patient. 2 episodes of vomiting documented on day 2 of admission. Haloperidol interaction noted. The dosage adjustment you're recommending exceeds the safe parameters given the existing conditions. The room went silent. That particular silence where fluorescent lights become audible, where the ventilator sounds too loud, where everyone is suddenly very interested in the floor tiles. Hargrove's jaw tightened. His hands, when he held them, went very still. And then he smiled, which was somehow worse than if he'd yelled. "Well," he said, and the word moved like a weapon across the space between them. "Well, well. A nurse with opinions about physician decision-making. That's refreshing." He looked at the assembled residents, and Katie could see him calculating something, weighing something, making a decision. "Tell you what, Katie. I like confidence. I respect people who speak up." His voice was warm now, generous, the tone of someone about to do something very deliberate. "I'm going to make you a bet. A public bet, right here in front of these witnesses." He gestured to the residents, who looked like they wanted to be anywhere else in the world. "I bet you," Hargrove continued, his eyes locked on hers, "that you won't last a week at Mercy General. You seem like someone with strong opinions about how things should be done, and in my experience, people like that tend to find themselves looking for employment elsewhere relatively quickly. So I'm thinking." He paused, letting the silence build. "I'm thinking you'll quit by end of day Friday. What do you say?" Katie didn't flinch. She didn't let anything show on her face, not the anger or the recognition of what this was, a dominance display, a marking of territory, a public establishment of hierarchy. She'd seen it 1,000 times. Predators used the same playbook whether they were wearing military dress blues or surgical whites. "No bet," she said quietly. "I need the job." "Of course you do," Hargrove said, and the smile broadened. "Friday. I'll remember." He turned and swept out of the ICU with his residents tumbling after him like confused ducklings, leaving Katie standing by room 347 with her hand still on the chart. Captain Torres was watching her, and when she glanced up, something moved in his eyes, a flicker of recognition, of understanding, of something that felt like it belonged to a different version of her life, one that wasn't supposed to exist anymore. She turned away from his room and moved back to her station, her movement smooth and practiced and invisible. Her fingers brushed the jacket lining as she passed, finding the patch, holding the seam between her fingers for just a second. Kandahar Provincial Hospital. Senior Chief Petty Officer Catherine Rodriguez. Operation Silent Shepherd. The Navy Cross hidden in a safety deposit box at First National under a name that didn't belong to anyone anymore. First week. Keep the head down. Don't let anyone see who you really are. But something had shifted, like a foundation cracking beneath clean tile. Hargrove had marked her. Torres had recognized her. And in exactly 4 days, the situation was going to get worse before it got better, because that's what happened when invisible people stopped being invisible. The light found them. And when light found darkness, someone always paid the price. The light found them. And when light found darkness, someone always paid the price. By the 3rd day, Dr. Hargrove had decided Katie Rodriguez was a problem that needed solving. Morning rounds came at 6:38 a.m., when the ER staff gathered in the main corridor with their coffee cups and their exhaustion. Katie stood at the back, her chart for Captain Torres, the Marine recovering in Bay 3, already reviewed and annotated. She'd flagged his morphine dosage at 0800, noting the documented opioid sensitivity from his Kandahar Provincial Hospital intake records. Standard protocol. Cautious care. The kind of thing any competent nurse would do. Dr. Hargrove held up her chart like it was contaminated. "Miss Rodriguez seems to think she knows better than attending physicians," he announced, his voice carrying the particular cruelty of a man who'd never been questioned before. 23 staff members watched. 2 residents. 3 nurses. A phlebotomist who was trying very hard to suddenly find the floor interesting. "Tell me, sweetheart, did you get your medical degree from a cereal box? Because your notation here is frankly insulting to this department." Katie's hands were steady. Her breathing even. She'd been covered in better men's blood, literal arterial spray from the thoracic bay at Kandahar Provincial, where 3 Marines had coded simultaneously and she'd been the only medic standing. A paper chart couldn't touch that. "Captain Torres has a documented opioid sensitivity from his treatment records, Doctor," she said, keeping her voice level as water. "I was following protocol." Hargrove smiled. It was the smile of someone who'd never encountered resistance he couldn't crush with volume and position. "I'll make you a deal, princess. Publicly. Right now. In front of everyone." He extended his hand mockingly. "You'll quit within a week or I'll personally apologize. What do you say?" Katie shook his hand once, firmly. She felt his fingers try to squeeze, dominance theater, and she applied exactly enough pressure to make his eyes wince. She didn't hold it long. Just long enough for him to understand she wasn't afraid of his fingers. "Deal," she said. The residents exchanged glances. Nobody made deals with Hargrove. Nobody won them either. That afternoon, Katie was eating alone in the cafeteria, a bowl of tomato soup and a turkey sandwich on a white ceramic tray. The fluorescent lights above cast everything in a sickly institutional hue. She was thinking about Michael, about whether she'd told him to finish his calculus homework before he'd left for school that morning. She couldn't remember. Dr. Hargrove appeared from nowhere, the way predators do, and walked directly toward her table. He knocked the tray off the edge with the back of his hand. The bowl shattered on the tile floor. Soup spread like a crime scene. The sandwich landed face down. 50 staff members froze mid-bite, mid-conversation. A woman at the next table actually gasped. "Oops," Hargrove said, his voice syrup smooth. "Better clean that up, sweetheart." Katie knelt. The tile was cold under her knees. A shard of ceramic bit into her palm as she gathered the pieces. Around her, people pretended to eat. The overhead music, some muted instrumental, continued playing like nothing had happened. Like a man hadn't just publicly humiliated a nurse in front of the entire staff. Like power didn't have a scent, and it smelled like testosterone and institutional protection. She stood. Disposed of the tray. Walked back to her station without looking at Hargrove's face. "Accidents happen," she said quietly, passing him on the way back. The next day, it escalated. Hargrove waited until the morning shift change, when the nurse's station was crowded and chaotic. Katie was updating Captain Torres's post-op charting, his blood pressure stable at 118/74, his O2 sat holding steady at 97% on room air. A good recovery. Exactly what you'd expect from a Marine whose body had been built for survival. Hargrove appeared at the station desk, his hands full of patient files. He threw them. Not gently. Not with theatrical flair. With real force, like a man throwing garbage. The charts scattered across the desk and onto the floor, papers sliding under monitors and medication carts. A pen fell. A stethoscope nearly went off the edge. "Pick that up, sweetheart," he snarled, his voice suddenly sharp as a blade. "Maybe you'll learn to fill them out correctly while you're down there." The station went silent. The kind of silence that comes right before something breaks. Katie took one measured breath. In through her nose. Out through her mouth. Just like she'd been trained in a classroom at Naval Station Norfolk, back when she was someone else. Back when she was Senior Chief Petty Officer Catherine Rodriguez. A single tear escaped her left eye. She didn't know where it came from. Rage, maybe. Or something older, the weight of 7 years of pretending to be smaller than she was. She wiped it without breaking eye contact. When she spoke, her voice was steady as surgical steel. "I've been covered in better men's blood, doctor. Your coffee doesn't scare me." The room didn't just go silent. It went backward, like someone had pulled the audio in reverse. Hargrove's face flushed a particular shade of purple that suggested his blood pressure was doing things his cardiologist wouldn't approve of. His jaw clenched. His hands formed fists. For a moment, maybe 3 seconds, Katie wondered if he was going to hit her. She would have let him. Would have documented every bruise with photographs and dates. Would have handed the hospital administration the lawsuit they deserved. Instead, Hargrove turned and walked away. His shoes clicked on the linoleum with the rhythm of a countdown timer. The nurses at the station went back to their work like someone had pressed play again. But they weren't talking. They weren't making eye contact. They'd all just watched something happen that shouldn't have been survivable, and the woman who'd survived it was still standing there, picking up patient charts. That night, after shift change, Dr. Hargrove sat in his BMW in the hospital parking lot and made 3 phone calls. The first was to Richard Castell, the hospital board president, who was currently on the 18th hole at Wildwood Country Club. "Richard, it's Hargrove. Got a second?" He didn't wait for an answer. "We've got an insubordination problem on the nursing staff. New hire. First week. She's already showing signs of being a significant liability, challenging my orders in front of residents, refusing to acknowledge hospital hierarchy. I'm concerned about her mental state and her fitness for duty." He listened to Richard's response, which Katie would never hear. Listened to the golf course sounds in the background, the distant crack of a club hitting ball, the murmur of other golfers. "Exactly," Hargrove said. "I just wanted to flag it before this becomes a larger issue. Maybe someone could quietly pull her references. Something feels off about her background. Very sparse employment history. Military service, apparently, though nothing official that I can find. Could be a fit issue." He hung up. Felt better. Power was about networking, about the phone calls made in private, about the small concerns planted in the right ears. The second call went to Katie's listed references. A VA clinic in Columbus, Ohio. A staffing agency in Pennsylvania. Pointed questions about employment gaps. Detailed questions about her military background. These were people who didn't know her, didn't owe her anything, and certainly wouldn't volunteer information about a classified assignment in Kandahar or the operation that had earned her a Navy Cross they'd pretended never happened. The third call was to the hospital's compliance officer, requesting a detailed review of all charting completed by Katie Rodriguez in her first week, with particular attention to any inconsistencies, documentation errors, or protocol violations. By the time Hargrove drove out of the parking lot at 11:44 p.m., he'd set 3 separate mechanisms in motion. By morning, Katie's references would be questioned. By week's end, a file would be opened. By Friday, he'd have the documentation he needed. He was very good at this. Had been doing it for 14 years. What he didn't know was that the woman he was destroying had survived things that would have erased most people entirely. Kandahar. Operation Silent Shepherd. 7 years of deliberately becoming invisible. He didn't know that she kept a faded unit patch sewn inside her jacket lining, the only physical proof that Senior Chief Petty Officer Catherine Rodriguez had ever existed. He didn't know that her hands had held lives together on operating tables that didn't officially exist. Katie worked her shift the next day knowing something had changed. She could feel it in the way the compliance officer appeared at the nurse's station, asking about her documentation. Could see it in the way Richard Castell was suddenly making surprise rounds through the ER. Could sense it in the subtle shift of institutional machinery, the slow turning of wheels designed to crush people who didn't belong. She said nothing. Asked nothing. Simply worked her patients, charted her notes, and kept her hand steady. Captain Torres watched her with eyes that recognized something. Something about the way she moved. The precision. The calm. The particular composure that came from having already survived the worst. "You remind me of someone," he said that evening during her vital check, his voice careful. "A combat medic who saved my entire unit in Sanjan Valley. Best soldier I ever served with." Katie's hand stilled on his blood pressure cuff. The monitor showed 128/76. Elevated slightly, but nothing concerning. "I have a common face, Captain," she said quietly. But she didn't meet his eyes. That night, during her break, Michael found her in the stairwell. Her 17-year-old son, with his father's dark eyes and his mother's jaw. He was carrying something inside him that looked like recognition. "Mom, Captain Torres is asking questions. He knows something." Michael's voice was low, urgent. "He knows who you are." Katie reached inside her jacket lining and touched the patch. Felt the worn fabric under her fingertips. The symbol of everything she'd buried. He can't know, Michael. The Navy erased everything. After Operation Silent Shepherd was classified, they made it very clear Senior Chief Petty Officer Catherine Rodriguez doesn't exist anymore. If I surface, if anyone connects me to that mission. She let her hand fall. Your father died keeping those records buried. I won't dish in at that. Michael's jaw tightened. But he nodded. He understood. He'd grown up understanding. 3 nights later, when visiting hours had ended and the ER had settled into that strange 11 p.m. calm, before the bar fights and overdoses of the midnight shift, Katie was charting at the nurse's station. Captain Torres was sleeping soundly in Bay 3, his recovery progressing exactly as expected. The monitors beat their steady rhythms. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. Then glass shattered. Not the sound of a dropped cup. The sound of a window breaking. Coming from Captain Torres's room. Katie moved before her brain caught up. Dropped her pen. Stood. Listened. A voice screaming. A man's voice, thick and slurred, words tumbling over each other in rage. Military killed my brother. You killed my brother. Another voice, Captain Torres, trying to de-escalate. Hey, man, I think you've got the wrong. A hunting knife. Katie could hear it in the sound, the particular whistle of a blade cutting through air. The sound that meant someone was about to die. 3 nights after the cafeteria incident, the ER doors burst open with a sound like a rifle crack. Katie was restocking the supply cart at the nurse's station when she heard it, not the usual slide of automatic doors, but something violent. Someone had thrown them open hard enough to make them slam back on their hydraulics. She looked up. A man in his 30s stood in the lobby, clothes hanging off him like he'd lost 40 pounds in 40 days, skin stretched tight over bone, eyes that had the particular glassiness of someone who hadn't slept in a week. His jaw worked silently, grinding at nothing. Methamphetamine. Katie's training whispered the diagnosis before her conscious mind caught up. She watched him scan the ER, watched his gaze lock onto the corridor that led to the patient rooms. Where's the Marine? He screamed. His voice cracked like broken glass. Where is he? The one from Kandahar. Katie didn't move. Around her, 3 residents froze mid-conversation. A nurse at the computer terminal turned. The man was shaking now, not trembling but vibrating like something with too much current running through it, his left hand clenched into a fist at his side. His right hand held a hunting knife, the kind with a 7-inch blade and a leather-wrapped handle, the kind designed to gut game. The fluorescent lights reflected off the steel, casting small bright diamonds across his face. My brother was in Kandahar, he was screaming now, tears streaming down his face, his voice breaking on every third word. Staff Sergeant Marcus Chen. You killed him. The military killed him and nobody cares and nobody answers and he's just gone and nobody, his voice dissolved into a sound that wasn't quite words anymore. Katie was already moving. Not toward him. Toward room 347, where Captain Torres was recovering from a pneumothorax and a sucking chest wound, a man who'd already spent 3 weeks in a military hospital before transferring to Mercy General. A man who had nowhere to run and a chest tube that could be compromised by exertion. She walked past the security guard, a man in his 60s named Dennis who was still looking confused, and down the corridor. Behind her, she heard someone reaching for the panic button on the desk. She didn't break stride. She pushed into room 347 and found Captain Torres struggling to sit up, his hand fumbling for the call button, his face pale against the hospital pillow. Stay down, Katie said, her voice steady as granite. Don't move. Don't exert yourself. There's a man, Torres started. I know. She positioned herself between the bed and the doorway, not between the door and the room, but directly in the path any blade would have to take to reach Torres's chest. Her hands came up in front of her, palms open, fingers loose. Ready. The stance of someone who'd stood this way 1,000 times before, in rooms much worse than this. The man burst through the door like something feral, the knife already raised. Katie saw his eyes track to Torres, saw the moment pure rage took over his cortex and left nothing but animal intent. He didn't see her at first. Didn't recognize her as an obstacle. He just saw the target behind her and moved toward it, breathing in ragged gasps that sounded like a broken engine. Katie spoke. Her voice dropped an octave. "Sir, I need you to put the knife down." He looked at her then, really looked. Saw a 5'8" woman in scrubs standing between him and his revenge. His lip curled. He didn't slow down. Katie didn't retreat. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't do any of the things you're supposed to do when someone with a blade is moving toward you. Instead, she stepped into the strike. Most people move away from a knife. Katie moved toward it, her shoulder turning to redirect the trajectory even as the blade descended. The steel found flesh anyway, it was too close, too fast, and she felt the cold kiss of the point as it penetrated the muscle of her left shoulder, felt it slide deeper with the man's full weight behind it. Pain bloomed like a flower, white and immediate and consuming, but her hands were already executing the wrist lock, the move they drilled 10,000 times at Fort Liberty, the move that became automatic when thinking stopped. She rotated her hips and locked his wrist against her forearm, bending his hand backward at an angle nature had not intended. The knife clattered to the floor. The man screamed, a high, keening sound like something was breaking inside him, and Katie heard footsteps thundering down the corridor, heard Dennis's voice calling into his radio, heard the cavalry arriving exactly too late to prevent any of this. Blood soaked through her scrubs. Warm. Spreading. She could feel it running down her back, could smell the copper scent of it mixing with antiseptic. Her vision grayed at the edges, her legs suddenly interested in betraying her, but her training was still running the show and her training never stopped running the show when a patient needed something. The captain's developing tension pneumothorax, left side, she gasped as security subdued the man, as the knife was being photographed and catalogued, as her consciousness began its negotiation with physics. Needs immediate needle decompression, second intercostal space, midclavicular line. O2 sats dropping. Listen to his lung sounds. Captain Torres was reaching for her, his face twisted in something that looked like anguish, but Katie's eyes were already closing. The floor came up to meet her with a sound like the end of everything, and then there was only dark. Dr. Hargrove arrived 4 minutes later, wheeling into the ER with the speed of a man who'd received a phone call he'd been waiting for. He took in the scene, Katie being loaded onto a gurney with a sheet of blood spreading across her shoulder, 17 stitches worth of damage glinting under the lights, her eyes still closed, and something shifted in his expression. Not concern. Recognition. She'd been the liability all along, and she'd just made it official. He pulled his phone from his coat pocket before security had even finished subduing the attacker. His golf partner answered on the second ring. "We have a major situation," Hargrove said, turning away from Katie's stretcher so he could speak without being overheard. "A nurse just assaulted a patient, caused a security breach, and created exactly the kind of negligence claim this hospital can't afford. We need legal documentation that this was her protocol violation. Not ours." In the gurney, bleeding and unconscious, Katie Rodriguez had already become a problem to be solved. Her heroism was about to become her undoing. The only thing standing between her and destruction was a 7-year-old text message, a photo of a unit patch, and 50 Marines who didn't yet know her name. Katie woke to the sound of a monitor beeping in steady, mechanical rhythm. Her left shoulder screamed. She didn't open her eyes immediately, a habit from another life, from before, when waking slow meant staying alive. Her arm lay in a sling across her chest, and beneath the hospital gown she could feel the tight pull of stitches, 17 of them, each one a small anchor holding her together. The blade had gone deep. 2 centimeters from the subclavian artery. She knew this because she'd heard the surgical team talking as the anesthesia wore off, their voices bright and clinical, discussing how close she'd come to bleeding out on Captain Torres's hospital floor. The pain was information. That's what they'd taught her in Kandahar, in the field hospital tent where she'd worked 18-hour shifts with rounds of incoming casualties and not enough morphine. Pain is data. Don't fight it. Listen to it. Pain meant she was alive. The door opened without a knock. A man in a charcoal suit stood in the doorway, his tie precisely knotted, his face professionally neutral. Behind him, visible through the small hospital room window, Katie could see Dr. Hargrove leaning against the nurse's station, arms crossed, watching. The man in the suit approached her bed like he was delivering a verdict he'd already decided. His shoes clicked on the linoleum floor. 1, 2, 3 steps. Deliberate. Authoritative. Miss Rodriguez, he said. His voice was the kind that had delivered bad news 1,000 times before and would deliver 1,000 times more. I'm Administrator Brenner from the hospital board. I'm here regarding your employment status. Katie's jaw tightened. She didn't respond. Instead, she watched him. The way his fingers gripped the folder. The slight tension in his shoulders. A man doing something unpleasant but necessary in his mind. Brenner opened the folder. The papers inside were cream-colored, official, stamped. He didn't meet her eyes. Effective immediately, Mercy General Hospital is terminating your employment. The termination is based on violation of patient safety protocols, reckless endangerment, and failure to follow evacuation procedures during a critical incident. The words landed like shrapnel, but Katie's face remained still. Her right hand, the only one that moved freely, lay at her side. She curled her fingers slowly into her palm. Control the response. Control the narrative. You're saying I violated protocol, Katie said. Her voice was hoarse from the anesthesia, from the tubes they'd had down her throat during surgery. By saving Captain Torres's life. Brenner continued reading. He was a man who followed scripts, who'd never had to improvise under fire. The attacker was armed with a blade. Standard protocol is to evacuate all personnel and patients not immediately requiring life support to secure areas. You engaged the assailant physically, which placed yourself and surrounding staff at risk. This constitutes reckless endangerment of hospital personnel. The captain was developing tension pneumothorax. Katie's words were flat, delivered like facts. Like she was reading a chart. Collapsed lung. Left side. He needed immediate needle decompression. 18 gauge, second intercostal space, midclavicular line. I called it while they were loading me. Brenner's jaw twitched slightly. He didn't care about the medicine. The medicine was never the point. Dr. Hargrove appeared in the doorway then, moving with the certainty of a man who'd already won. He stepped into the room with his hands in his white coat pockets, and his presence seemed to compress the air. Katie had seen predators move like this before, the moment they sensed blood in the water and knew there was nothing the prey could do about it. You're not a surgeon, Hargrove said. His voice was calm. Almost gentle. That was worse than anger. Anger was honest. This was something else. You're a nurse who thinks combat instincts belong in a civilian hospital. But they don't. In a hospital, we follow protocols. We don't improvise based on personal tactical experience. We escalate. We let trained security and law enforcement handle threats. Katie turned her head slowly to look at him. Their eyes met. In that moment, she saw something shift in his expression, a flicker of confusion, a brief hesitation at her absolute lack of fear. He'd expected tears. He'd expected the trembling that came with betrayal and pain. Instead, he found something else entirely. A complete absence of doubt. Captain Torres is alive, Katie said. His lung is re-expanded. His oxygen saturation recovered to 94%. The blade missed all vital structures. Those are the facts. The facts, Hargrove said, are that you violated protocol and we've documented it. Sign the termination paperwork, and we can minimize the damage to your professional record. Refuse, and we pursue legal action for violation of hospital safety standards. It wasn't a threat. It was a promise. Brenner positioned the termination letter on the plastic bedside table. A pen lay beside it. Katie's right hand was steady as she picked it up. The signature at the bottom of the page felt like surrender, but her hands didn't shake. Her breathing didn't catch. She signed each letter carefully, deliberately, as if she were signing away nothing at all. Because in some way, she understood that she'd signed away everything the moment she'd stepped between that knife and Captain Torres's chest. They left the document on the table. Hargrove lingered for one moment longer, studying her face as if trying to solve a puzzle he'd suddenly realized was more complex than he'd thought. Then he turned and walked out, his footsteps fading down the hallway. Katie was alone again with the beeping monitor and the rain that had started to fall outside her window. She didn't look at the termination letter. She didn't need to. She already knew every word. 2 days later, the rain was still falling. Raleigh Memorial Cemetery stretched out beneath dark, rolling clouds. The grass was slick and muddy, and the headstones appeared and disappeared through sheets of water as Katie made her way across the grounds. Her left arm remained in its sling, the stitches pulling tight with each careful step. The pain was there, steady, a constant whisper beneath everything else. She found the grave where she always found it. The headstone was granite, gray as the sky, etched with letters that had begun to fade. Daniel Rodriguez. U.S. Navy SEAL. Beloved husband and father. 1978 to 2016, he'd been 42 when the IED took him. Michael had been 9. Katie knelt slowly, her right hand bracing against the headstone for balance. Rain soaked through her thin jacket, plastered her hair to her face. She didn't wipe it away. The water ran down her cheeks and mixed with tears, and there was no point in separating one from the other anymore. I tried, she whispered. Her voice was barely audible above the rain. I tried to disappear like they ordered, Daniel. I tried to just be normal. To give Michael a quiet life. No shadows. No secrets. No mother who moves like she's still expecting an ambush in the corridor. She pressed her forehead against the cold stone. But I stepped in front of that knife without thinking. I didn't choose it. My body just moved. Muscle memory. 18 years of training, and it takes about 2 seconds to override 8 years of trying to be someone I'm not. Her shoulders trembled, but her voice remained level. Control the response. I failed our son again. That's what this is. Not the firing. Not the termination letter. Failing Michael because I can't stop being who you trained me to be. Thunder rolled overhead like distant artillery. The sound of something that wanted to destroy everything beneath it. Katie reached inside her jacket with her right hand, her fingers finding the worn fabric of the lining. Beneath the threads, she could feel it, the faded unit patch from Kandahar Provincial Hospital. She'd kept it there for 8 years, hidden against her ribs like a secret she was guarding, like the patch itself might be classified if anyone discovered it. The Navy had taken her official records and locked them away in some vault in Arlington. They'd erased Senior Chief Petty Officer Catherine Rodriguez from every database, every roster, every record that mattered. They'd done it to protect the mission. They'd done it to protect the families of the people she'd saved. She'd tried to honor that erasure. She'd failed. They erased me, and I still couldn't stay hidden, Katie whispered to the grave. She didn't know if he could hear her. She didn't believe in things like that anymore. But speaking the words into the rain felt important. It felt like marking something. Like leaving evidence that she'd tried. She didn't see the figure standing 50 feet away beneath an oak tree, rain soaking his high school athletic jacket, a shadow box clutched against his chest. She didn't see Michael's jaw set with a decision that had been forming since the moment he'd learned what his mother had done, the moment Captain Torres had told him everything, the moment the Marines had agreed to help him find the truth that the hospital and the Navy and the government had tried to bury. Michael watched his mother kneel in the rain at his father's grave, her entire body bent beneath the weight of a secret she'd been carrying so long it had become indistinguishable from her bones. He watched her shoulders shake. He watched her touch the inside of her jacket like she was checking for a pulse. He'd been 14 when she'd first come home from the Navy. She'd been thinner then, carved down to something angular and precise, with eyes that scanned rooms like she was cataloguing exits and escape routes. She'd learn to smile for him, eventually. She'd learn to sit still without bouncing her leg. She'd learn to pretend that sudden noises didn't set her muscles into high alert. But she'd never quite managed to disappear. And now she never would. Michael stepped back beneath the tree, waiting, watching, his hands gripping the shadow box with the kind of certainty that came from knowing exactly what came next. The Marines had told him it would work. Captain Torres had confirmed it. The records existed, he'd been assured. They were classified, yes. Buried, yes. But they existed. And sometimes, the truth needed to be dragged into the light whether it wanted to be or not. Katie remained at the grave for another 20 minutes, rain falling around her like she was standing beneath a waterfall. Then she rose slowly, her right hand steadying herself against the headstone, and began to walk back across the muddy grass toward the parking lot. She didn't look over her shoulder. She didn't see Michael watching. She didn't see the future arriving like a helicopter in the distance, its rotors beginning to turn, its lights preparing to sweep across the landscape and illuminate everything she'd tried so hard to keep in shadow. She just walked through the rain, one careful step at a time, her left arm in its sling, her right hand clenched into a fist. 1 week later, Katie was at Mercy General one final time. The staff changing room was empty at 11:19 p.m. She'd chosen the time deliberately, late enough that most of the night shift would be occupied with patients, early enough that she wouldn't have to make small talk. She pulled her locker open and began removing her things. 3 pairs of comfortable shoes. A spare scrub top. The small photograph of Michael when he was 7, before the Navy, before loss had etched itself into his face. She placed everything into a canvas bag, her movements methodical, final. The bag was half full when she heard it. Boots on tile. Multiple sets. Synchronized, rhythmic, the particular cadence of military march. 1, 2, 3, 4. The sound grew louder, echoing up through the hospital's lower levels, moving through corridors with the kind of purposeful intensity that made every cell in Katie's body recognize what was happening before her conscious mind caught up. She froze. The boots came from the main entrance level, from somewhere above. The hospital's marble floors carried sound like a drum. Whatever this was, it was large. It was coordinated. It was coming toward the heart of Mercy General like a tidal wave moving toward shore. Katie closed her locker door slowly and turned toward the changing room exit. The boots came first. Katie heard them before she saw anything, a rhythmic percussion on tile that made her freeze mid-motion, her hand still gripping the metal locker door. Synchronized. Precise. Military cadence unmistakable to anyone who'd ever marched in formation. 1 pair became 2. 2 became 10. By the time she turned toward the corridor, the sound was a thunder of boots moving in unison through Mercy General's halls, a sound that belonged to combat zones and parade grounds, not hospital linoleum. She stepped into the hallway just as Michael burst through the main entrance 50 yards away, and Katie's breath caught in her chest though her face remained still as stone. Her son carried a shadow box before him like a relic, his 17-year-old frame somehow taller, straighter, moving with a purpose that hadn't existed a week ago when she'd sat beside his bed whispering apologies at her late husband's grave. Behind him rolled Captain Torres in his wheelchair, the Marine's jaw tight, his dress blues immaculate. And behind them, Katie counted without moving her eyes, 50 Marines in dress blues filed through the ER entrance in perfect formation, filling the entire lobby. Their uniforms moved like a single organism, shoulder to shoulder, boots hitting tile in that terrible, beautiful synchronization that transformed any space into something sacred and untouchable. Every head in the hospital turned. Patients paused mid-sip of water. A resident froze with a clipboard halfway to her chest. Nurses at the front desk stood in complete silence. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, indifferent to the impossible sight spreading through the lobby like a military tide. Michael's voice carried across the space, loud and clear and deliberately projected to reach every ear in the building. "Mom, they need to see these." He held the shadow box higher, his eyes finding hers across the distance, and Katie saw something in her son's expression she'd never seen before, not anger, not grief, but absolute certainty. He opened the box. Even from where she stood frozen near the locker room, Katie could see the medals catching the fluorescent light. The metallic shine of gold and ribbon. The Navy Cross gleamed at the center of the display like a dark star, and beside it, 2 purple hearts in their cases, and the bronze star with Vela positioned at the right corner. Her hands didn't move. Her breathing didn't change. But something in her chest split open, a controlled, measured fracture that she could not, allow to show in her face. Captain Torres's wheelchair made a soft whispering sound as someone pushed it forward, closer to Michael. His hands trembled slightly as he lifted a file folder, the pages worn and creased as though they'd been read 1,000 times and then reread. His voice, when he spoke, cracked like a man who'd been shouting for hours and had finally found his words. Senior Chief Petty Officer Catherine Rodriguez, he read, each word separated by a breath that sounded like relief. United States Navy Combat Medic. The words hung in the lobby air like a defibrillator shock, something that should have stopped Katie's heart and instead restarted it into a rhythm she thought had died 6 months ago in Kandahar Provincial Hospital, in a tent surrounded by men's blood and the smell of diesel fuel and her own hands moving without permission from her rational mind. Then a man stepped forward from the Marine formation. Katie recognized the bearing before she recognized the face, Commander Price, SEAL Team 3, his presence in the lobby like a loaded weapon made human. His voice dropped into the register that combat officers use when they're about to say something permanent. 3 tours in Kandahar. His words were calm as a briefing. 17 soldiers saved under direct fire, including Senator Morrison's son, which is why her records were classified when the CIA buried the operation. He looked directly at Dr. Hargrove, who stood frozen near the administrative wing's entrance, his face cycling through colors like a traffic light. Red. White. Gray. Your doctor knew those records were sealed, Hargrove. He called the VA himself. And then he tried to forge them anyway. It wasn't a question. It was a reckoning. The elevator to Katie's right dinged open, and 2 FBI agents in dark suits stepped into the lobby with the kind of certainty that comes from holding federal warrants. One of them called across the space in a voice designed to carry through courthouse hallways and interrogation rooms, Dr. Robert Hargrove. Hargrove's mouth opened. Closed. Opened again. You are under investigation for federal evidence tampering, obstruction of military personnel records, and fraud. The lead agent held up documents. When you contacted Senior Chief Rodriguez's employment references, you were informed by the Department of Veterans Affairs that her military records were classified and sealed. You were told explicitly that accessing, altering, or attempting to duplicate those records carried federal penalties. He took a step forward. And then you attempted to fabricate personnel documents claiming she had falsified her nursing credentials. I was protecting the hospital. Hargrove's voice had gone thin. She had gaps in her employment history. Unexplained absences. Suspicious behavior. You knowingly attempted to forge federal military personnel records. The second agent produced handcuffs, the metal glinting like a promise. That's a felony, Doctor. The hospital board president, Hargrove's golf partner, the man who'd signed Katie's termination letter without asking questions, emerged from the administrative wing. His face had gone the color of old plaster. Bob, what did you do? Hargrove's finger pointed at Katie across the lobby, a gesture that somehow encompassed everything he'd built his career on, the fear he'd installed, the hierarchy he'd weaponized, the assumption that dominance could survive indefinitely if you never let anyone speak. She was insubordinate. She questioned my orders in front of residents. I built this as reputation on discipline and hierarchy, and she undermined that structure with her. He searched for words like a man drowning. Her nursing competence. Captain Torres wheeled himself forward until he was positioned directly in Hargrove's line of sight. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of a man who'd been blown up and lived to testify about it. She questioned your morphine dosage because it would have killed me, Doctor. My Kandahar medical records, which Senior Chief Rodriguez remembered from treating me 3 years ago in a forward hospital, list a documented opioid sensitivity that your narcotic order ignored. Torres paused. She saved my life. Again. Commander Price stepped closer, and something in his movement made Hargrove take an involuntary step backward. Senior Chief Rodriguez has personally saved more lives under fire than most surgeons see in 30 years of practice, Doctor. She didn't undermine your hierarchy. She exposed its incompetence. The FBI agent snapped the handcuffs, and the metal sound, that soft click-click of steel closing, seemed to echo through the entire hospital. Hargrove's wrists were suddenly bound. His protests rose to a shout that bounced off tile and fluorescent panels. I didn't know who she was. How was I supposed to know? Her records were erased. This isn't fair. As the agents led him toward the exit, his voice grew more desperate, higher pitched. She was just a nurse. Just a quiet nurse. Nobody tells you what she really was. 50 Marines watched in absolute silence as he passed through their formation. Not one of them moved. Not one of them flinched. The ER doors slid open automatically, and the agents guided him through into the late afternoon light. The door slid closed behind him with a final, soft hiss of hydraulic air. The silence that remained was the kind of silence that happens in operating rooms after a successful resuscitation, that held breath before anyone confirms the patient's alive. Michael crossed the lobby in long strides and reached Katie before she'd processed her own movement forward. He held the shadow box open, and Katie looked at the Navy Cross with the same composure she'd used to meet every other crisis in her life. Her son was crying. She wasn't. "I'm proud of you," Michael said. "I had to tell them. I had to tell the world." Katie touched her son's shoulder with her left hand. Her right was still recovering, still aching in that deep bone language that comes from knife wounds, and she let that touch carry everything she couldn't say in a lobby full of people. 6 months later, Katie sat in her new office on the 4th floor of Mercy General Hospital, the brass nameplate on her door reading Director of Emergency Medicine in letters that still surprised her when she walked past it. The afternoon sun slanted through windows overlooking Raleigh, and on her wall hung a photograph in a simple wooden frame. 50 Marines stood at attention in the lobby where Hargrove had been led away in handcuffs. Michael stood beside her, holding the shadow box. Captain Torres was saluting from his wheelchair, his face bright with something that looked like vindication. And tucked in the corner of the frame, finally displayed where it belonged after 2 decades of hiding in jacket linings, was that faded unit patch from Kandahar Provincial Hospital. She was reviewing resident evaluations when the knock came, a young third-year resident, nervous energy radiating from her like heat shimmer. The resident entered with the careful movement of someone approaching something ancient and untouchable. "Dr. Rodriguez, I wanted to ask about the new combat trauma protocols you're implementing, because my background is Senior Chief, actually." Katie looked up from her paperwork, and the resident flinched slightly at the gentleness in her voice. "I never finished my MD. But I've stitched enough arterial bleeds under mortar fire to teach you what matters. Sit." She gestured to the chair across her desk. "What do you want to know?" Her phone buzzed an hour later, Michael's text arriving with the kind of certainty that comes from 18 years of knowing his mother. "Captain Torres says hi. He's teaching our combat medicine class now. Says you taught him everything he knows." Katie typed back, "He's a good liar." Another text arrived, this one from Commander Price, and Katie smiled slightly when she read it. Community College posted teaching positions. "Thought you'd want to know your friend Hargrove is listed, CPR Fundamentals Instructor, $18 per hour. Raleigh Community College. Effective immediately." She didn't respond to that one. Just set the phone down and looked at the photograph on her wall. 50 Marines. Her son. The unit patch finally visible. The shadow box containing everything that had been taken from her and everything that had been returned. There was a small plaque on her desk, engraved in her son's careful handwriting, words from her late husband, "True class is what you do when the lights go out." Katie thought about that now, sitting in her new office with the city spreading out below her. She thought about Dr. Hargrove teaching CPR to community college freshmen who had no idea who he was or what he'd done. She thought about the nurse who had absorbed his insults with measured breaths and never given him the satisfaction of her fear. She thought about the knife entering her shoulder and the decision to step between Blade and Marine anyway. Some people perform when the spotlight finds them. Some people rise in the moment when cameras are rolling and medals are being awarded. Others simply do what's right in the dark, whether anyone's watching or not. They stand between danger and the vulnerable. They remember the details of a Marine's medical history years after treating him in a war zone. They refuse to disappear even when ordered to. They survive. Katie returned to her resident evaluations, her left shoulder aching slightly where 17 stitches had left their permanent reminder, not a scar to hide, but a mark to carry with the quiet authority of someone who'd chosen her patience over her safety and lived to teach others how to do the same. If you made it this far, you know why Katie Rodriguez walked into that ER and why 50 Marines showed up to reclaim her. Share this story. Subscribe for more tales of quiet heroes who change everything. And comment, what would you have risked to protect someone you'd never met?